So I think one of the underlooked areas of financial planning and wealth planning is the aspect of time. You know, any good financial advisor is going to do some variation of what my mom taught me when I first became a financial advisor way back. I guess I was a teenager, honestly. I mean, I think I passed my Series 7 at 19. But my mom had been an advisor, and she said, always ask what the money is for. Any good advisor is going to ask that because that relates to your time frame. And so, your basics is, time frame. What's this money for? Is it for retirement? Is it for your daughter's wedding? Is it for your kid's college in a year? A 1 year time frame. Just because somebody is a certain age doesn't mean, they might be 90, but the time horizon might be long because maybe it's for the grandkids for college in 20 years or in 18 years or something. So you want to, that's basic financial planning, figuring out what your time frame is, relates to what the money is, what kind of risk tolerance you have, all that kind of ties in. The other basic thing that any financial plan should have is kind of the risk tolerance around that money. And then you'll see a lot of financial advisors will do things like a retirement plan and calculator. Okay, what are you going to need when you retire? How much are you going to need to live on? You live on $100,000 in income now. You want to retire in 20 years. With inflation, that's going to be X dollars, 220. How much do you need to be able to live off of 220 now to keep the same lifestyle you have now? Something like that. That's pretty basic. There's a lot of calculators like that. And like I say, any good financial advisor will do that. And, we all know the other saying, time is money. But for this video, I want to just talk a little bit about kind of going one step deeper than that. And thinking, having observed, having done this a long time now, I got my own time frame. And that's part of why I'm doing it. Like I said, I think I was 19. It's hard to believe. Maybe I was 20. I was very young. I was under 20. I was under 21 for sure. Because I remember, the office would have office parties at places that allowed drinking, and they had to get special permission for me to go in because you had to be 21 and above. But, so it's been a long, long time. And I've been lucky enough to have a front row seat at seeing people build wealth, especially because of being in the Bitcoin community. I've seen a lot of people build vast wealth. And now that is its own time frame. That's been a long time now, too. I've done that like 13 years now. So I've seen people that were, 22 when they started, and now they're 35. Very, very big difference between 22 and 35. And that's part of what my point is with this, to think about time is money, and your goals will shift as time goes on. When I was joking with a friend the other day, I was talking about, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to own a nightclub so bad. I thought that would be the coolest thing. And I was a little bit more into sports cars. And then when I got to the point where I could afford a real nice sports car, or especially a nightclub, I have zero interest in owning a nightclub now. No interest whatsoever. You can give me a nightclub for free, I don't think I'd want it. But I really wanted one when I was younger. I just thought that would be so fun and cool, and I could have my friends at the nightclub, and we'd have our own little VIP section, and then I'd have my own little, room in behind the scenes, like, your typical club owner has, where they go and it's a little more quiet and you can hang out after hours. And I thought that would be fun. And, by the, whatever, 10 years, 15 years later, by the time I could reach that goal, I had no interest in that goal. My wife and I had talked about, I love the Four Seasons. I had this dream of staying, I want to stay at 50 different Four Seasons, 1 week each for the whole year. I'll stay 2 weeks at home and then 50 weeks traveling around the world. I'm very fortunate I could do that now, but again, no interest. And my wife wouldn't want to do that either. Like, that's, having done some travel, like, you realize, no, that's a kind of goal a younger person might have. Not somebody with families. It would be very disruptive for our kids. It's just not desirable. So now I try and plan goals for much, much later. I try and plan goals that I have for, okay, what's it going to be like when I'm 70, God willing, I'm still alive. I want to, not be lonely. I want to be able to walk. That's why I'm literally walking now. I go on these walks now. You want to physically train for the future. Do you want to be able to lift up your grandkids? Do you want to be able to, I definitely hope that I'm able to walk for a long, long, long time and have an environment where you're not lonely. Our first kid went off to college and it's parents who've had this will sympathize. It's like, oh man, your little buddy is not a little kid anymore. He's off to college. And it's a little bit lonelier, even though we have 3 other kids still in the house. But then you're like, oh boy, just a couple of years, they're all going to be out too. And we lucked out with this one. He's only a few miles down the road at a close by college. But you think about the future. Okay, well, they're all going to have their own lives. They'll all be off to college, and then they'll be off to careers and have their own families, God willing. So then what? We have like kind of an empty place. So, one thing that I planned, we have a house that has like some extra guest spaces and stuff. So hopefully that keeps you from being lonely when you're older. When I'm older and the kids are all out on their own. If you have some guest spaces, you can you have more options to have people come and visit. And it's kind of a cool spot, farm. It's the kind of place that people would like to visit. And, our youngest daughter is friends with an older woman in town. She just goes and visits her and has tea. She just sits and talks. And, a lot of older people love that. So planning for the future, having an environment like that is the kind of thing that, I think about now. When I was 20, I was planning on goals I wanted to write down. And now, I plan for goals that I will want later on. And not just planning goals financially, but planning what your outline of what your life is going to look like, and trying to imagine, okay, what am I going to be interested in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What is my life going to be like? What's my health going to be like? What's my family situation going to be like? And planning ahead for that. And what kind of ties in with that, what made me think about this video, I was thinking about somebody who's done really, really well in investing. World class, and he's been very, very fortunate, and he's had an interesting life. He was living, there's a couple guys I was thinking about like this who live way, way, way beneath their means. He has hundreds of millions of dollars, and he lives, up until recently, he lived like somebody who had $500,000. He did finally buy some nice houses. But I know a lot of people like that, people who live very modestly, just kind of chilling. But the interesting thing was he was really cranking with the investing. And then he got, I want to be careful because I don't want to accidentally dox somebody, but let me just say, got sidetracked, or he just had some stuff. Okay. My point is, a lot of people get kind of taken off the board, or they take themselves off the board. And again, time is money. Now, luckily for him, he's fine. But And I don't feel so bad for him about the wealth. He's still extremely wealthy and his money is to continue to grow. But I do feel bad that he kind of, he's out of the loop for a little while. He's kind of off the board. And I've seen that happen a lot. I've seen people where they're kind of crunching along with their careers. Stuff happens. They get into some issue. They have some kind of, problem with, regulators, or they have a nasty divorce, or they have something that distracts them, or, God forbid, drug problems, alcohol problems. And you do see that with wealth. And that also goes hand in hand with people who haven't planned. They're not planning for a life of fulfillment. They're planning whatever. They're thinking like I did when I was 20, like, oh, how cool it would be to own a nightclub or whatever. They're not really thinking about in depth and fulfillment. And those kind of things can be very, destructive to both your financial well-being, but also your kind of mental well-being in your life. I mean, the goal of money is to give freedom and ultimately to provide happiness for you, and ideally a family. I'm very big on family. I've said before, my financial advice is to have a family. And there's studies that actually show this. You're going to make more money if you have a family, because you're going to be more motivated to take care of that family. You have a legacy. It's kind of like, in my opinion, one of the big purposes of life. But you can get off the track of the happiness track and off the track of the wealth track by having these distractions. And that, again, it's time. You lose that year or whatever where you're, having a alcohol problem. I mean, if you're lucky, you could ruin your whole life with an alcohol problem, be an alcoholic for years and then die. If you're lucky, maybe you have a problem, then you realize it and you go into treatment fairly quickly. But either way, you lose time. Time, and like I say, time is money. So I think it's important for people to think about that, even though it's an old cliche. Think about your time and what you're doing and how it relates to your overall, not just financial plan, but life plan and fulfillment plan, and what you're doing with your time, and what time is the beast that will never stop. Time is the certainty. Time will erode everything. Everyone will get old or die. Everything will change. Change is constant. And if you're going to be around, you got to plan for it. You got to plan that this march of time will continue. And if you think about that and really try and internalize that, I think and hope that it will help you have a better financial plan and a better life plan and hopefully a better happiness plan. So this is a little bit, kind of disjointed, and the point is quite simple, but it really is. It can't be underestimated, the fact that time is money and time is important, and it will march on. God willing, you'll be around. I'll be around. You'll make it if you live. But if you do, you got to plan. It's going to be a different world in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And it's a gift. Every day is a gift. So planning to use that gift if you're fortunate enough, and to figure out what your life is going to be like and try and make your best estimates of what you're going to be like at that time and how you can act accordingly. I think, from what I've seen from a lot of people, observing a lot of people over a lot of time, I think that's more likely to lead to fulfillment. So that's my 2 cents for the day, or 2 minutes, or 12 minutes. Time is money.